brick wall professionally in about the year 2000. I remember the day exactly. I know exactly where I was. And I remember saying to myself, that's it. I can't do this anymore. I'm not doing this anymore. The first half of my career, if you like, it started making films. I started out making films for business, and that work evolved into doing internal communication work, and ultimately into organizational development work. And in all of that work, we were working for large organizations. That was, they were the clients for that kind of work. All the ones you can think of: pharma, energy, telecoms, governments, airlines, airports, you name it. We did that kind of work for those kinds of companies who need that kind of service. And when in our filmmaking days, we won a lot of awards for our work. We were really good at it, and I absolutely loved it. So the 10-year-old me had achieved her dream. But as we got closer to the inner workings of organizations, we began to have questions about what was really going on in there. What was actually happening inside organizations? They seemed like disturbing places. When you come from a creative background, which is really quite free, and it's very different to a corporate setting. And in parallel to that work, completely separate from that work, we were doing a lot of reading, David and I. We were reading about issues which are now mainstream. They are not just mainstream, they are actually the headlines. But in the mid-90s, nobody was talking about these issues. Absolutely nobody was talking about them. And in fact, you'd have to go searching for them to find books about them. And those issues are ones that we know about now: climate change, biodiversity loss, species depletion, soil erosion, pollution, radical inequality, and the foreboding idea of a migration crisis that would happen as people would move from lands that can no longer support them. And at that time, this was the future. Now it's the present. And at that time, I had no idea how they were connected to the work I was doing. I just knew that they were. And I felt I was doing this work inside these organizations, and they had something to do with these issues that we were reading about. But it was kind of impossible to talk about these issues inside these organizations. And even today, it is not possible to talk about them in the way that they need to be spoken about. And at a certain point, the gap between, if you like, my consciousness on the one hand and the work I was doing on the other became so wide that I actually couldn't sustain it anymore. And that's when I said, I can't do this. I won't do it, actually. So I stopped. And it was, that's just me, stop. I just, no plan, stop. And I found a master's in responsibility and business practice in the University of Bath, which had been set up by the Action Research faculty, and was supported by the Body Shop and Anita Roddick, who was still around at that time. And at the heart of it really was a critique of the mindset that's running business. And I left 2 years later with a lot of things, loads of things. I mean, it absolutely changed my life. But the important things to say for the purposes of this and for you is that I realized that my work, more than anything else in the world, my work is how I contribute to the world. I could do all kinds of things privately. I could become a vegan. I could fly less. I could, when I could afford a car, I could get an electric car. I could do all those things, but nothing would make as big a difference as my work in the world. My work was shaping the world. Another thing I left with was an understanding of the problem inside organizations. My research question for my thesis was, why don't we act? Why are we not acting in response to the critical issues of our time? And my locus, my area of interest was the relationship between business, politics, and the media, and how the dysfunctional relationship between those domains is leading us over the edge into an abyss. And I went to speak to the people who lead those organizations, the ones who run them, running government, running large media organizations, running large businesses. And what I discovered was that they knew less than I did about these issues, and they felt just as powerless as I do. So I realized that power isn't there. And perhaps what struck me most of all, and what I still live with, and it drives me now, is the gap between what people were prepared to say off the record and what they were willing to say in public. So there was a great understanding of the problem privately and a silence about that in public. And that gap, I think, is the gap we now have to deal with. And the last thing I left with, the last key thing I want to say, is that I left with absolute conviction that nature holds the key. If we're going to get ourselves out of the mess we're in, then nature holds the answer. And I left with the resolve that I was never going to be part of the problem again, that I did not know what that meant. So I just said, that's it. Nature's the answer. What does that mean? I haven't a clue. And we call what happened now then the wilderness years. That's what we call them here, because we had no idea what to do then, because it wasn't obvious. There was no obvious answer to that question. What do I do now? And we tried to raise interest in these ideas among businesses, and there was absolutely flat no interest whatsoever. And we were determined not to go back to be part of the problem. And so the bottom line is that as a result of that, we went completely broke, absolutely broke. I remember one Christmas, I had 97 cents in my bank account, and we had a debt the size of a modest house. And we still wouldn't go back. And we did the thing that we could do. We communicated. So we did a lot of writing, spoke at conferences, trying to raise these issues. We discovered that there was a massive market among business people, for people who will tell organizations what they want to hear, and almost no market whatsoever for the truth. And we began to work with the people who did show up. Some of them are on this call today, and they gave us a chance. They were willing to hear the truth, and they wanted to work in different ways. They understood that we have a real problem with how we're working, and really together, I suppose, working with them, we became different kinds of practitioners as we tried to do the work of bringing the rules of nature and the principles of life into our work with people and organizations. So I'm in a conversation today about being braver and bolder, because I absolutely believe that by continuing with business as usual, we are going to take the entire system down with us over the edge. And we have a handful of years left now. And if we cannot find a way to work the way nature works, that nature has certain principles and rules and we must abide by them, then we're not going to address our problems. We need to radically overhaul business as usual. And that's my opening provocation. That's why I'm here. I want to begin with COP, the Conference of the Parties, and Antonio Guterres, and what has happened in recent months. Just before COP 26 happened in Glasgow this year, we had the most up-to-date IPCC report. And the top line of that is that it was advertised, if you like, as a code red for humanity. A code red for humanity. He opened COP in Glasgow with a speech in which he said, we are digging our own graves. And just the other day, just this week, a sidebar report was released from the IPCC, which they called themselves a damning indictment of our failed climate leadership. Now, I think it's really important to listen to these words, because this is not parliamentary language. This is not the way diplomats speak, but this is the way diplomats are having to speak now, because we have not been listening. We have not been listening. We have been doing this work, the IPCC work. The actual conversation began, the conversation that evolved into the IPCC began 50 years ago in 1972 in Stockholm. And 50 years later, we actually have a climate and biodiversity crisis that is worse than the crisis was when these talks began. And my provocation today is, what if our approach to the crisis is actually part of the crisis? Here's what I believe. I believe that we have broken the entire system because we don't know how it works. I believe we're failing to address the crisis for the very same reason. We don't know how it works, and we don't know how it changes. We don't know how to heal it. We've been educated to within an inch of ignorance. I think that's true of all of us on this call, and we've built that ignorance into everything. And I'm going to spend the rest of the time explaining what I mean by all of that. I think that we're in a real bind, a real difficulty, because we are living inside the wrong story. We're living inside Newton's physics. We're living inside an old Newtonian kind of physics, which is more than 300 years old. It is a story, if you like, of a very fixed, predictable world. So the seduction of Newton's physics was that he painted a picture of the world that was predictable and knowable and manageable and controllable, that there were laws that we could understand, and that if we could understand how those laws worked, we could actually control this world, we could predict this world. And this was very, very seductive at the time, because the story at the time was actually driven by a lot of religion, a lot of fairy tales, and human beings seemed to be living in the lap of the gods. But now we could become gods because we could actually understand how the world works. But that's the wrong story. That science has long since been updated, but it has not been integrated into our understanding of the world. It hasn't been integrated into our professional development. It hasn't been integrated into how we run organizations. And that story, that new story, that up-to-date story, is the story of life and living systems. We don't live in a machine. We're actually participants in a complex living system that works in a completely different way. It couldn't be more different than a machine. It is non-linear, it is complex, it's interdependent, it is emergent, it's not at all predictable or controllable or manageable in the ways that we've been taught that it is. So far from being cogs in a machine, we are participants. We are participants in a living system that's evolving through us. We are actually participants in the evolutionary process, this larger evolutionary process. And we are the role that we play is through our decision-making, through our actions and our decisions. We guide evolution. That's our function. All species do this, but we in particular, because we are so powerful, are now shaping the path of the evolution of the entire planet. And we need a new story. We can't, this one is killing us, it's killing everything. And there is a new story. And the new story is the story of life. It's the story of nature and living systems. And if we are open to it, that story is right outside the window. It is right outside in the world. The biggest classroom that ever existed is there waiting for us to learn how it works if we're open to it. So just a couple of things about this new story. It's about thinking and working in systems. So thinking systemically is really about, ultimately at its core, its simplest, systems thinking is about thinking about how things work together. It's about how the whole thing works. If mechanistic thinking succeeded by breaking things up and working on the parts, systems thinking is about putting all the parts back together again and rethinking how it all works, and in particular, how things work together. How do they work together? Living systems are self-making. They make themselves. They're not made, they're not controlled, they make themselves. And they make themselves as the parts of the system enter into relationship with each other. And so in this example, the bee and the flower, is the one I always use because it's so recognizable. The flower and the bee look like separate things. In fact, they are a united system. They are completely interdependent. The flower makes the bee and the bee makes the flower as they go about their business. And in the process of going about their business, just their daily business, their daily chore of making a living, the bee looking for nectar, the flower looking to be pollinated, in the process, they make the larger system, which is the meadow. So they and all the other species going about their business, just doing what they do, make the larger system. So living systems are self-generating networks of relationship that produce life. That is what nature makes. It's a life-producing system. More life, ever more life. That's what nature creates. Life is the emergent result of the system of relationships, or the many systems of many relationships. And the provocation here is for us to think about, as we think about being braver and bolder in the world, what can living systems teach us about ourselves and our role in the world right now and our purpose in the world right now? Because I think they can teach us a lot. I think the key thing that they can teach us is that, and this is really crucial, we are not going to get out of the mess that we've made until we change this story, the story that's driving the whole system. You know, this problem that we're in is consistently framed as an energy problem, as a fossil fuel problem. And the promise inside that is that if somehow we can, tomorrow morning, we could flick a switch and we would have completely green energy that was neutral environmentally, that somehow we would have solved the problem. But we would not have solved our problem, because if we gave ourselves green energy, but continued with our core goal in organizational life, which is infinite growth in this finite physical world, all we would do with our green energy is destroy the world more efficiently. So we have a real problem that's a cultural problem. It is a whole system problem. And until we change the story that's driving the whole system, we're not going to get out of the mess. These two ideas, the idea of the world as a machine, of hierarchy, of parts, and the alternative, the idea of the world as a networked, interdependent, emergent world, are two fundamentally different views of the world. They couldn't be more different. And it matters how we see the world because it shapes what we do. It shapes how we think and therefore what we do. If you think that we live in a hierarchical, mechanistic world, then you think that all of these problems that we're falling down with are separate problems. But if you understand that we live in a single system, then you understand that actually what we have is a whole system problem. If you think we live in a hierarchical, mechanistic world, you think that those problems are somebody else's problem. But if you understand yourself as a participant inside a system that is emerging through us, an evolutionary process that we are participants in, then you realize that it's everybody's problem. These problems are everybody's problem. If you think that you're part of a machine and you're a cog and you don't have much power, you think it's somebody else's job. But actually, once you understand that you're a participant in a system that's evolving through you, it's everybody's job. All of these problems are everybody's job, not just somebody's job, all of our jobs. And so our purpose now, through a living systems lens, our purpose is to use our work to regenerate the human and social and natural systems that we have broken. Because we broke them. We broke them. We broke them, and only we can heal them. And so the question is, and the challenge at the heart of seeing our purpose differently is these two questions. How is my work in the world part of this problem? Because it is. There isn't anybody here who is outside the system. We are all inside the system. We all make it, we've all broken it, and we can all do something to heal it. So how is my work part of the problem? And how can my work become part of the solution? That's the challenge. And what can nature and living systems teach us about organizing as we might think about this challenge? Well, I'm going to use this image, a mechanical system, to sort of make it really clear. This is an image of a car, or more accurately, it is an image of the parts of a car. And actually, the point here is that this car, in its current state, is going nowhere. It is just the possibility of a car. All the parts are there, but they're not connected up. And until they are connected up, the car is not a car. It's just the potential of a car. So living systems are all about relationships, and relationship equals capacity. Relationship building is all about building the capacity to do things, to do stuff in the world. So building relationships and reconnecting the things we've broken is a really important work in the world. In living systems, connected up systems are smarter. The more systems are connected up, the more intelligent they are. The more disaggregated they are, the more stupid they are. And we know this from, we often say, I mean, you know this from working in organizations and dealing with them. How come organizations are more stupid than the people who work in them? And that's because they're organized wrong. So when they are organized right, when they're more connected up, they are more clever, they're more intelligent, they're smarter. And when we start to see organizations in this way, through the lens of living systems, it becomes really clear that an organization isn't a thing and it's not a place, although we talk about them like that all the time. An organization is nothing more, or rather at a more fundamental level, it's a pattern of relationship. And it's a set of relationships that we keep on enacting and embodying over and over and over and over again. And if we don't disturb the social architecture, then we will keep on getting what we currently get. So the challenge at the heart of this is to disturb the social architecture that keeps things the same, the patterns and routines and habitual ways of working that just keep the show on the road. We've got to stop seeing a world of silos and stovepipes and begin to see networks of possibility, which are latent and there until we crystallize them, until we catalyze them, like the car, until we put the pieces of the puzzle together. The capacity that's there can't be activated, but when it's connected, it can. So we live in a world of networks of possibility that it's up to us to activate through our work. And the challenge here is disturbance. Disturbance is the word to use when it comes to change in complex systems. If we aren't willing to disturb and be disturbed, then nothing new is possible. Now, I'm a member of the CCA, and I've been a member of the CCA for the last 18 months or so, and I've been in many, many meetings. And I want to say this to the coaches who are on the call here and to all of us, but those of us who are working in organizations. It seems to me that too often people want to have their cake and eat it. There's a kind of an illusion that we can get to a new place unruffled and undisturbed, that somehow, you know, we can get to in a completely different world without breaking a sweat. Well, that's just a fairy tale. We have to be willing to be disturbed and to disturb the things that keep the show on the road. Let's talk about leadership. Leadership among those who we call leaders, and leadership as it is in a system. When you look at the world through a hierarchy and mechanistic and managerialist lens, you think that the smart parts are at the top. That's how we organize. That's how we behave. We hire them, we pay them more, we expect more of them. When they don't work out, we fire them, or they fire themselves because they realize that they can't control the system, and they feel that in our country, our Labour Party leader resigned the other day after just 2 years. And the promise in that party is that somehow it's going to be better because they're going to have a new leader. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing's going to change because that man resigned. The truth is that the intelligence in any living system is in the whole thing. It's in the relationships between things. It's in all of it. And once you begin to see life this way, you realize that leadership is not a position. It's not up there, because there is no up there in a living system. There's only everywhere in living systems. Leadership is not a position, it's a way of being. It's a way of behaving. And you can behave that way anywhere and everywhere. And the job of leaders, people who have positions of power and influence, is not to be smarter engineers with more accurate tools of prediction and control. The job of people who are in leadership is to become better gardeners, to cultivate the conditions, to help change happen, not to make it happen, but to make change possible. And the only way that you can do that in a living system is by engaging in people in the radical participation of that system. In other words, inviting people, the system itself, into its own transformation, into thinking about itself and how it works and how it operates and how it might change. So radical participation is the key. And the challenge here, and it is a challenge for people who have been schooled and whose experience is to be in control of things, and whose identity is about control, is to loosen control. In order to become the kind of leader that's required now, we have to loosen control. We have to let go of the reins. We have to say, you know something, I don't know the answer to this. We have to be willing to say that in public. And I know this from doing it myself, that when you say to a room full of people, I don't know what to do, it is electric what happens. People show up because somebody knows what to do, or together we know what to do. But until leaders say, I don't know in public, they will keep the machine on the road. And the other thing we have to do as leaders or people in positions of influence is to engage in complex organizing. It is the simple truth that the consciousness of leaders and the state of organizations are interdependent. And an organization cannot move beyond the consciousness level of those who are in positions of power and influence because they stop it from happening. But leaders who are prepared to engage in complex organizing, prepared to engage in the radical participation, inviting people in, are actually in the business of transformation. If we keep on embodying the past and we keep on embodying the patterns and routines that keep the problem going, nothing's going to change. That is clear. The future will look like today, probably a whole lot worse. And talking about change, what can living systems teach us about change? Well, this is what we say change looks like. The one on the left, the arrow on the left, that somehow it's like a straight line into the future that's predictable. It's full of milestones and targets and objectives and goals and all of those things. This is the language of organizational life. But if you look at what actually happens in your life, the reality of change is much more like the little loopy arrow on the right, the going all over the place, the holy shit, what just happened there. That's what change really looks like. It's messy, it's uncertain, it's circling. But this is what we do. We take reality and we overlay it with our plans, linear plans. So we try to deny the mess of life and we overlay it with plans and targets and goals. And that's all very well when you live in a steady state world. If something's very steady, this kind of work works, but not in a world that's unpredictable and cannot be controlled. You cannot plan your way to a future that can't be predicted. It's just a nonsense, actually. And the extraordinary, expensive exercises and long-term planning that happen are exercises in absolute futility. They keep people very busy going nowhere. The truth is that the future is a question, not an answer. And answering the question is the work of change. That's the work. And living systems can teach us how to do this because they work. All biological systems work in cycles. It's a strategy that nature's developed to work in cycles. So living systems work in cycles they respond to feedback, and they self-correct. They don't work in the distant future. They work in the here and now, working in short cycles, seeing what happens, responding to feedback, and self-correcting in response to what just happened. And the systems that respond to changes in their environment and respond to that kind of feedback survive. And the others just don't. And this is the story of evolution. Almost everything that ever existed on this planet doesn't exist anymore because most species don't manage to get through the evolutionary process because they can't learn fast enough in a changing world. And it may be that human beings turn out to be one of those species. That story's yet to be told. We'll see. So change through the lens of living systems is not an initiative that we plan today and implement some other time. It happens right here, it happens right now, or it is never, ever, ever going to happen. This is the moment when we make change, whatever this moment happens to be. And this is the opportunity. This is the brilliant thing about this, that when you see change this way, then everything we do, all of our work becomes an opportunity to embody the new thing. So every moment, every project, every initiative, every conversation becomes an opportunity to embody the thing we say we want to be. So we can enact change right now, begin to learn the moment we decide to. Change is not linear, it's non-linear. It is itself an evolving system of relationship between ideas and people and events. And all you need to do to know that that's true is to watch what's happening in Ukraine at the moment. What happens in Ukraine ultimately will not depend just on the Security Council of the United Nations. It depends on a whole system, the people on the ground who have been activated by a president who has said to the world, when you come, Russia, you will see our faces, not our backs. He has enlivened an entire population. It will happen because of the ordinary people who are staying to fight. It will happen because of the people who are leaving. It will happen because of the people around the world, especially in Poland, for example, who are opening up their homes to people who are on the move. It will happen because the EU did something the other day that it has never done before. It has enacted a law that has given refugees right of passage and right of access to services on the ground in countries. This never happened before. Something's happening in the world. This is historic. So all of those things will determine what happens. All of those people will determine what happens in Ukraine, not just the people, the smart parts at the top. Change is a journey. It's not a destination. So there's no point in planning because where you're going is going to change as you and the world around you changes. So it's an evolving journey. And from that perspective, we have to move from linear planning to emergent learning. That has to be our paradigm. We have to now begin to make 9-to-5 work the subject of experiment. I think we have to start experimenting madly at work because we have a handful of years to get our act together and we cannot figure it out in the abstract. We actually have to try experimenting with what we're doing. And as we do that, the new way of working will become the new structure in the making. We will discover the new thing by doing the new thing. We have to learn our way into the future. The challenge here is to just begin. To see not knowing is a virtue. It doesn't matter that we don't know. Actually, it's a good thing that we don't know. And to prioritize learning over what we know. To not be so dependent on our expertise, be willing to learn something new. And crucially, and this is really important, we have to be willing to risk something important. If we don't risk important things, we're playing at the edges here. We have to put something important on the line. Something important about our lives has to go on the line here. And the final piece of challenge I have here is this question. What are you willing to do? I mean, that's really what we have got to address here. Every single one of us, there's something we can do. And I want to talk here just a little bit about leadership, about disturbance, and about courage. And I want to do that by talking about a little girl who really, I think, has taught us what leadership is. And to point out what happened, because this is disturbance in action. She just left school on a Friday and she sat outside the Parliament building and she just kept on doing that. And she had parents who allowed her to do that. And she sat there on her own for a long time, and the authorities moved her along down the road, across the river, down the street, and she kept coming back. And after a while, some more kids showed up and they started to join her. Now, I want to point something out here. These kids don't look like they're in the business of starting a movement. They're just sitting on the street looking bedraggled, and you could walk past them any day. But in fact, they did trigger something. Within a few weeks, and it's just a few short weeks, there were more people there. And within a few more weeks from that, and it was only weeks, there were people all over the world. And Greta Thunberg was speaking at the United Nations in Davos. And the point I want to make here is that they didn't set out to start a movement. What they did through acting was they activated a movement. They activated a system that was already there. It was ready, waiting to be activated. Just by the way, like is happening with regard to the Ukraine. A system is ready to be activated when we trigger something by disturbing the routines, by doing something different. So difference is crucial. Disturbing ourselves is crucial. Having the courage to do that is crucial. And she said this, and it's worth repeating. Now is not the time for speaking politely or focusing on what we can or cannot say. Now is the time to speak clearly. I couldn't put it better. Now is the time to speak clearly. This is a child speaking to adults. And I think we need to take the rebellion out of the streets and start bringing the rebellion into the corridors and offices where the decisions that shape the world are made. We need an executive rebellion. We need an executive rebellion. We need to have the courage to break our silence at work where we impact the world. We have to have the courage to commit ourselves to the work of regeneration and renewing the systems that we've broken. And we have to do that by learning to work the way life works and change the way life changes. That's our work now. We have a handful of years to get our act together.